Good morning, class. Once again, congratulations for being this far in your first year and in your first semester for the academic year 2022-2023. Now, this afternoon, I'll be recording with regards to the last topics that we'll be discussing for your MST. I actually had discussed this in the previous days or in the previous weeks. I'll make this recorded video for the benefit of those who were not able to attend at hindi nakakope sa ating pacing. But nevertheless, we will start with our discussion. Allow me to share to you my screen. Okay, so for a moment. Now, before we will proceed with regards to your remaining topics for our MST or our environmental science class, so we will be reviewing a bit of our previous topic. We had learned in the chapter 4 during our midterms about the essential processes in your ecosystem. So this includes the biotic components in your ecosystem, such as your primary producers, your consumers, and your decomposers. So class, remember about this three main biotic components of your ecosystem, because they are going to play a vital role, most especially in the area of later on in the different processes that's occurring in your ecosystem. Now, let me just review what is primary producers, or what are primary producers. Now, for your primary producers, they are the one who synthesizes organic substance from inorganic molecules. Now, remember that your primary producers are capable of a food making process called photosynthesis. And most of the time, they are referred to as the plants. Primary producers are plants. No? Tandaan niyo yan. Why? Because they are the one who initiate food chain and food web. For an instance, later on we're going to discuss ano yung meaning nun. And at the same time, they are also the one that serves as the source of the food of the different consumers later on. So they are called primary producers. Now they utilize light or for chemical processes. Sunlight, basically it's the sunlight that they utilize. So next, we've also discussed about your photosynthesis. Now for photosynthesis, remember that this is the food making process among plants. So it uses sunlight, water, and carbon dioxide as the main materials for the process of photosynthesis to take place. Now, with regards to your photosynthesis, I want you to remember that walang photosynthesis kung walang sunlight. Okay? Now, for the photosynthesis, again, it is commonly written as CO2 plus 6 molecules of water plus will give you the result of glucose plus oxygen. So the chemical formula for glucose is C6H12O6. Now for a more simplified pa yan na version. Okay? So that's C3C6O3. Okay, ganon. Now, so we'll not dwell so much on that. I just want you to memorize about this. And next thing is, we've also discussed about your chlorophyll as the important pigment in your plants. So they are responsible for capturing the light. Okay, so they play a vital role in the food making process among plants kasi they are the green pigment in a leaf, maybe, or on stem, that serves as the one capturing the solar energy. Now we know that without solar energy or sunlight, we cannot expect photosynthesis to take place. Now for your biotic components and ecosystem, I just want you to remember this diagram. Now for solar energy, it will be captured by your chlorophyll. Now your chlorophyll will mix with your carbon dioxide and water. Now it will utilize carbon dioxide and water as the main product for photosynthesis. Now for the main byproduct, what do you mean to say by byproduct? Yung end product is your glucose and oxygen. Now for your glucose, remember that your glucose will be the one utilized by your plants, since plants in nature manufacture their own food. Yung sugar, yung pagkain ng mga tanim. And plus the oxygen as the byproduct, ito naman yung sinisinghot natin. Yun lang yung gusto ko maunawaan ninyo. Now, for your consumers, they are referred to as the non-chlorophyll-bearing organism that depends upon other organism for nourishment. Now, for your cellular respiration, it's the breakdown of your glucose to produce ATP. Yung example ko dito, if you're going to use sugarcane for a sweetener of your coffee, hindi pwede. It has to undergo breaking down. Kailangan mapudpud siya into brown sugar or kalamay, which may use as energy to power many reactions throughout the body. So if I'm going to ask you, ano ang gagamitin ng body mo in order to uh, as energy to power many reactions throughout the body? So your answer is ATP. Kasi in the cellular level, ito yung gagamitin ng ating mga cells. Now for your ATP or your adenosine triphosphate, it is the source of energy for use and storage at the cellular level. Now, yung structure po ng ating ATP, tandaan nyo lang, it is composed of one adenine and a ribose sugar. That's why adenosine, adenine, and ribose sugar. And three, because triphosphate siya. Hindi siya sang diphosphate. Triphosphate because there are three serially bonded phosphate groups. Now, as a simple diagram for your ATP conversion is, you can see it on your screen. Now, when you will utilize or kung kakain ka ng carbohydrates, hindi naman yun ang magfa-fuel agad-agad ng energy in your body. So it must have it must undergo chemical processes. Now, upon mastifying or yung pagmuya or mastification, so kung mumuyain mo yung pagkain, there are a lot of enzymes na magko-convert dyan sa carbohydrates hanggang it will reach into cellular respiration, no, wherein your glucose will be converted to your ATP, and that ATP will be used by your body for metabolic processes. Ganun lang yung tatandaan natin. So, next tayo. So, there are three main steps of cellular respiration. Number one is your glycolysis. Number two is your citric acid cycle and your oxidative phosphorylation. Now, for your glycolysis, ito lang yung gusto kong tandaan ninyo that for your respiration or cellular respiration steps, in glycolysis, I want you to see the word glyco. Glyco means sugar and lysis means breaking down. So basically, glycolysis is the first step in your cellular respiration, the breaking down of sugar. And the rest, you just have to memorize your citric acid cycle and your oxidative phosphorylation. Now, for your biotic components in ecosystem, yung third one is your decomposers. Now, for your decomposers, remember that your decomposers are very important since, again, sabi ko sa inyo, we will be having pile-ups of dead bodies in the absence of your decomposers. Now, decomposers obtain energy by breaking down the complex molecules of proteins, fats, ano pa ba, dead plants, and animals. So they are the one responsible for breaking down of these dead bodies, pwede mga feces or dung among chicken. So lahat yon are responsibly broken down by your decomposers. Meaning, they are the one responsible sa pag-breakdown ng ganong mga compounds, shall we say. Okay, next. Now for our lesson for today, we will be discussing about the energy flow and your biochemical cycle in ecosystem. Now, how do ecosystem work? There are two major processes that's happening in your ecosystem. Remember about your energy flow and your biogeochemical cycles. Ito lang, ulit-ulit. Your energy flow and your biogeochemical cycles. I had made this into a simpler version. I'd studied actually for this kasi if I'm going to refer to your book, it would take me 3 weeks or 3 meetings at least for you to better understand this. But I will try my best to give you the simplest and the most, and the basic explanation for all these things, of course, without compromising the topic. Now, for your energy flow, tandaan nyo class that in your energy flow, your sunlight is where all life depends. It's energy. It is the one involved in your photosynthesis. Remember, lahat ng life here on Earth depends on sunlight. Sir, as in tuod, of course. Why? Because again, to initiate your photosynthesis as one of the major materials your sunlight gives solar energy. Now, your solar energy is a main key for photosynthesis to take place. This is true. This is true with the illustration. Now, if you're going to put a plant inside your home or your room, which is not ventilated, or hindi siya naaabot ng sunlight directly. Now, later soon, after a month or 2 weeks, ang plants niyo will turn its leaves into yellow. Why? Because there is an absence of sunlight. Now, if you're going to recover your plants, what you're going to do is just to expose it again in the sunlight and babalik ulit yung sigla niya. Now, that's how important your sunlight is. Remember that sunlight is where life depends its energy. Number 2 is I'm going to discuss to you about the food chain. For your energy flow, remember about food chain. Food chain is in ecology is the sequence of transfers of matter and energy in the form of food, pwede, from organism to organism. Now, for your food chain, I want you to see this illustration. Now, your food chain is composed of your producer, primary consumer, secondary consumer, and your tertiary consumer. Now, for your producer, they are plants, no? Because they are chlorophyll utilizing na or chlorophyll forming na organisms or na biotic components of your ecosystem. Now, for producer, for an instance here in the illustration, we can see grass. Yung grass will be a food, will serve as a food. For example, here in the simple chain, to grasshopper. Yung grasshopper class, as the primary consumer, will be eaten by your bluebird. Now, your bluebird now becomes your secondary consumer. In nature, most of the time, your primary consumer could either be a herbivore or an omnivore. Okay, remember that your herbivores eat plants. Your omnivores eat both plants and your meat. Okay, ganyan. Now after bluebird na kinain niyo yung grasshopper, your snake, for example, will serve as your tertiary consumer. Kakainin niya yung bluebird. Now, your tertiary consumer in nature is carnivorous in nature, okay? But it can also be omnivores. But it's not herbivores, okay? Why? Kasi nga, your tertiary consumer will eat the secondary consumer. Now, it has to be an animal or meat, no, from the word carne, carnivorous. So they are eating meat strictly, okay? Now, your owl naman here, because there are really owl who serves as prey to some snakes. Now, for instance, in this illustration, your owl will serve as your predator. Yung kumakain, predator yon. Yung kinakain ay prey. Ayan, tandaan nyo yan. Yung prey ay yung kinakain, and yung predator yung kumakain. Now, your owl will defecate or tatai yan, and or the owl itself will die. It will go back to the ground kasi madunot siya, di ba? Now, from the energy coming from the grass to grasshopper, na-transfer to bluebird, na-transfer to snake, na-transfer to owl. Tapos yung energy na defecate ng owl, for example, we deposited into your soil now contains the energy from the owl. Now, yung energy from the owl will again be reabsorbed by some plants as fertilizers or even trees or what ano pa ba, shrubs or whatsoever. Tanim, no? Magiging pataba siya sa ibang tanim. So that initiates the food chain. Food chain is the basic one. Now let's go back to your food web. Ano naman yung food web, sir? Now your food web is a series of interconnected food chain. Tandaan nyo lang, pag food web, just like for an instance here in the example, you can see that your primary consumer is your grasshopper. But you know, your primary consumer or your secondary consumer is not just limited to bluebird. Grasshopper could be consumed directly by man kasi may mga apan nga ginabaligya subong, or for an instance, your frog. Okay? If yan, magkakasanga-sanga yan, no? And there were series of food chains that will be developed or that will be made. So ang mangyayari is it will become your food web, or this now refers to your food web. Ganun lang. Series of interconnected food chains. Now, for your biogeochemical cycles, it is the pathway of which a chemical substance cycles or is turned over through or moves through the biotic and the abiotic components of the earth. Now, ang tandaan nyo lang sa biogeochemical cycles, ito yung pag-cycle naman ng chemical substances. Okay? Yun lang. Kanina, yung nagsa-cycle is yung food chain, for example. Yun, yung energy flow, yung energy mismo yung nagsa-cycle. But in here, it's your biogeochemical cycle. Now, for your biogeochemical cycle, there are two types. Number one is your gaseous type. Number two is your sedimentary type. Now, for your gaseous type, the reservoir is in the atmosphere or hydrosphere. Sir, how true that gaseous type tapos hydrosphere? Remember that in hydro means water. Now, your water is composed of your hydrogen and your oxygen, meaning there are gaseous ano yun, gaseous component even in the water, no? Sa bodies of water, for example. Now, we will also look on the sedimentary type, wherein its reservoir is in the Earth's crust. Now, for your sedimentary type, we know that the Earth is divided into many, tawag doon, mga boundaries. Just like, for example, your core. In the inner one, your mantle. Ayan, sunod sa core, mantle, and your crust. Sa crust class, dito siya nagso-support ng life. In your core, walang life doon kasi sobrang init. You will melt down, no? So, ang init doon. Kaya in the crust talaga, dito tumutubo yung forms of life and it supports also life. Now, to further explain that, I want you to understand these four important cycles which we need to consider. Number one is your water or your hydrologic cycle. Number two is your carbon-oxygen cycle. And number three is your nitrogen cycle and your phosphorus cycle. Let's go directly to your water cycle. Remember that the Earth is composed of 75% water. And most of this, but not all, are your ocean water. In fact, the Pacific Ocean is one of the biggest ocean bodies here on Earth. Malaki siya. Now, in the hydrologic cycle or for your water cycle, I want you to imagine that you are cooking your tinigang. Now, ang tinigang mo, wala man siguro yung nagluto siya, no? Kalayuhan niya, pagkaon niya, nagatubig-tubig hapon ang tinigang unless nagluto ko aros kaldo. But basically, for your evaporation, when heat is applied to water, there will really be formation of water droplets or your water vapor. Okay? Kaya gani, ang takop mo una mala, pero pag initon mo ang tubig, nang nagkakadto dito ang tubig, nagasaka siya in the form of your water vapor. In the same manner, your hydrologic or your water cycle goes. Now, in an open field and in a bigger scope or in a bigger scale, your ocean is open. Kaya yung sunlight, again, your sunlight is the main source of energy among life here on Earth. Na yung sunlight, ang gagawin niya is it will initiate evaporation in the ocean. Okay, dito muna tayo sa illustration. Now, your evaporation will turn your water into water vapor. Alam niyo class, yung water vapor, pag magkukumpol-kumpol yan in the process called condensation. Now, for your condensation naman, why is it na umuulan? Because there is already a heavy weight of water vapor in the air in the form of your clouds. Ayan. So, yun yung mangyayari. Kaya nga, umuulan kasi bumibigat sa taas. There is an increased water vapor kasi, for example, this is true to na kung subong init-init, karon sa hapon sigurado maulan din na. Okay? Because there is an increased water vapor. Kasi nga yung ocean natin is an open field to say. Kasi open naman talaga siya. So there is a direct sunlight that's penetrating your ocean, turning your water into water vapor. Now, it will evaporate and it will condense in the process of condensation. And yung condensed water vapor, if it cannot hold, the clouds cannot hold it anymore, it will precipitate. Okay? Meaning, bababa. Magpe-precipitate. Okay? Bababa yung, or magsisettle down yung condensed water vapor in the form of your rainfall and your snow. Yun yung explanation. Sir, saan pupunta yung tubig? Yung tubig from your precipitation in the form of your rainfall, just for an instance, will be going to bodies of water, specifically your lake. And your lake, dito yung lake, ito yung ang nag-supply ng tubig dito is your water cycle. Kaya nga, dali mahubas ang mga fish pond kung wala ka ayon nagaulan because there is a disruption in your hydrologic cycle. Now, for this case, your lake will serve as the one that will catch yung precipitated na water vapor in the form of rainfall or your snow. Sir, bakit snow? Yung snow naman, since it's winter, for example, malamig yung klima, no, cold winds. So ang nangyayari from water droplets, this is my my analyzation. Hindi na siya makaka-reach ng earth na in the form of water. Instead, it will freeze. It will be turning into a snow or snowflakes, whatsoever. Now, as a proof na may water vapor na nakakontain doon sa clouds. Remember that if you're going to ride, sino nakatry na mag-ride ng airplane nito? I think there are some who really tried. There is turbulence happening kung dadaan tayo sa clouds. Kaya as much as possible, umiiwas sa clouds. Why? Because again, your water has weight. Your water vapor has weight. Meaning hindi lang siya tungdo cotton lang tawon. Meaning may ara siya sang explanation behind. Now for again, paano magsa-cycle yung tubig? Remember that lahat ng bodies of water here na hindi na here sa atin, for example sa Coronadal, it will end up in the ocean, no? Doon talaga yan mapupunta. Ang ocean is the catch basin of all the bodies of water here on earth. Nag-cycle lang siya. So for example, for instance, your Lake Cebu, ang tubig sa Seven Falls are coming from your sa lake in Lake Cebu, the big lake. Now, ang tubig sa lake halina siya sa water cycle. It could be from a heavy pour of rain or whatsoever. Okay? Now, for your lake, yung lake ninyo, hindi lang siya nag-end sa lake. Remember, may Seven Falls, meaning there's transference of water to into another scenario or into another area. From falls, ang falls naman nagsusupply ng tubig sa Ala River, for example. Yung Ala River class, yung pinakadulo niyan is ocean. Okay? Yung aided drainage niyan is your ocean. So I want you to remember that. And the cycle will continue. Mag-evaporate ulit. After evaporation through your sunlight, magko-condense, uulan, it will supply the waters in your lake and other bodies of water aside from your ocean, of course, and your ground floor water will be again going back to your ocean. Ganun lang siya, your hydrologic cycle. I believe that you're able to understand that. Number 2 is your carbon-oxygen cycle. We have learned about this already. In your photosynthesis, remember na kakailangan natin yung carbon dioxide in your sunlight in order to produce your byproduct oxygen and glucose. Ang glucose dito is kinakain ng puno and tanim. Now, the source of your carbon dioxide are your animals, ayan, and your humans. They are source of carbon dioxide. Now, in the presence of your carbon dioxide plus the sunlight, your chlorophyll will catch again your sunlight. That will undergo a process called photosynthesis. And the cycle continues. Ganun lang siya kabilis, class. Next is your nitrogen cycle. Ang gusto kong makita ninyo dito is yung thunder and your nitrogen fixing bacteria. One of the most important cycles happening here on Earth is your nitrogen cycle. Sir, bakit? Hindi naman namin siya nahihinga. Kaya nga, that's the point, because your nitrogen composes your almost 75% of the atmosphere has nitrogen in it. Now, yung nitrogen hindi siya readily used by humans. It has to undergo fixation or conversion. Now, your thunder and your nitrogen fixing bacteria, in their presence, that's the moment na yung nitrogen ninyo will be converted into a usable nitrogen among humans. Now, how does nitrogen fixing bacteria also help? They also help through ammonification. Okay? So, nangyayari is your nitrogen fixing bacteria has the capacity to convert your nitrogen into a more usable form. Ganun lang yung nitrogen cycle. Siya ang pinaka-important na cycle again because it contains 75% of the atmosphere. Now, for the next one will be your phosphorus cycle. Now, for your phosphorus cycle, tandaan nyo lang that it is a byproduct of, it's a sedimentary type kasi nga it involves the Earth's crust, mountains, rocks. Now, through constant stress in your environment, pag-ulan, pag-init, weathering of rocks happen. And remember that through your weathering of rocks, soil is formed. Okay? Ganun lang, tandaan nyo lang. Ano ulit yung source ng soil natin? It comes from the weathering of rocks. Now, in weathering of rocks, ayan, no? So we will expect that there will be changes in the components. Now, in the ancient times, ang ginagamit nila in order to produce fire is stone. Why? Because stone is rich in phosphorus. Your phosphorus it could initiate ignition or pwede siya mag-initiate ng fire. Now, through weathering of rocks, your phosphorus will be converted to phosphate. Again, mako-convert siya sa phosphate as fertilizer runoff from farmland, or some of this phosphate will be deposited in the underground reserve. Now, kung nasa underground reserve yan siya, class, it will be absorbed by your plants. Now, can you just see how the chemical is being transferred from one component to another? Now, from weathering of rocks, yung phosphorus naging phosphate, na deposit siya underground, and your plants utilize your phosphate by absorption. Na-absorb siya ng plant. Yung plant kinain ulit ng animal. Okay? And yung animal nag-decompose, nag-defecate, nagtae. Now, there will be decomposers that will be responsible for returning that phosphate into the underground reserve. And the cycle continues. Paulit-ulit, balik-balik. Now, I have a practical illustration for this. Remember about your St. Elmo's fire or your San Telmo? Scientifically, it is proved that St. Elmo's fire are true. It's such that it was named after a saint. Ayan. Now, ang explanation natin dyan is most of the time, among interviews of what I had read, most of the time, yung St. Elmo's fire daw ay nagpapakita sa mga accident-prone area. Kasi nga, doon may mga nadidisgrasya at the same spot, almost the same spot, okay? Ganon. So, remember that your blood is rich in phosphorus. Sige ulan, sige init, itong mga blood nyo na spill dito sa highway or into that cement or sa lupa nga na, it will deposit, no? So, and it will, from phosphorus, it will be deposited as phosphate under chemical changes. Now, for your phosphate in increased and accumulated amount, remember that your phosphate and phosphorus is capable of ignition, capable of initiating fire. Now, ang nangyayari, kasi sige ulan, init, now, there is a visibly seen na parang ball of fire na nagalumpat-lumpat. And in tradition, or in superstition, rather, they are called San Telmo in our layman's term. Pero class, those are real. I mean, bakit naman siya totoo, sir? Kasi nga, scientifically, it's being explained that your phosphate is deposited, no, in that particular area. Now, phosphate is capable of ignition, of creating fire. In fact, the translation of phosphorus in Filipino is posporo. No, so it's a major material for your match, for example. Now, yun yung nangyayari. So, ang tanong naman, sir, bakit pag daw tumatakbo ang tao, hinahabol ng San Telmo? Bakit nga ba? Because, again, your body is rich in phosphorus. Ayan, so naa-attract. In fact, you can burn human body kasi nga maraming phosphorus. Should it be na hindi masyadong mataas siguro yung phosphorus level natin. Remember that your body is a moisturized one, no? Basa siya in nature. Pero bakit it's capable of being caught on fire? Kasi nga, again, your body is rich in phosphorus. Kaya Yun yung story ng phosphorus. Maaalala niyo yung St. Elmo's fire for that. So I hope that you understand these 4 basic cycles we need to consider. Now, let me just have a brief review. We have discussed about your water or your hydrologic cycle, your carbon-oxygen cycle, and your nitrogen cycle, and your phosphorus. Now, for your water or hydrologic cycle, important thing is your sunlight. Through evaporation, no, magkakaroon ng water vapor kasi nga there is heat that initiates the formation of your water vapor. And the amount of your water vapor in the air is called humidity. Kaya paang at times because humid ang atmosphere, meaning there is an increased water vapor in the atmosphere. Kaya mainit. And most of the time, pag paang, pagkahapon sina, it will really rain. Because again, your water vapor will condense in the form of your clouds. And from the clouds, if it sends na mabigat na, it will precipitate. No, may holding capacity lang siya. This happens, and this is true with your cloud seeding. If you happen to encounter cloud seeding, ang ginagawa nila, nagahulog sila sang salt naman to siya, no, in the atmosphere. I mean in the sa clouds in order for rainfall to be formed. Now, the same with your hydrologic and or water cycle. Number 2 is your oxygen cycle, and this is associated with your photosynthesis. Your nitrogen cycle, tandaan lang si thunder and your nitrogen fixing bacteria. And this is the most important cycle in the ecosystem. Again, why? Because nitrogen comprises 75 to 78% of the atmosphere component. And can you just imagine if we will not utilize that, no, in increased amount, maybe it could cause intoxication, no, or whatsoever reactions. Sayang din pag hindi natin nagamit. Now, your thunder will not be formed if walang condensation. Kung walang ulan, wala ding thunder. Okay? Now, again, we will go back to your water cycle. And we will go back to the roots, and that is your sun. Now, for your phosphorus cycle, ganun din. Through your weathering of rocks, phosphorus will be converted to your phosphate, and it will be deposited underground. No? And not underground, but not necessarily underground, but in the soil or in a surface, your plants will begin to absorb that. Now, in the absorption of your plants, kakainin ng animal yung plants, there will be transfer of phosphate of your phosphate to animals, magde-defecate, and through the help of your decomposers, again, babalik sa circulation yung inyong phosphate. Now, for the limiting factors in the ecosystem, so I had listed here 10 according to your book. Number 1, light. Bakit limiting factor? When say limiting factor, the amount of these particular things or these particular factors will affect the processes in your ecosystem. Number 1 is your light or your sunlight. Now, remember that we cannot expect, no, photosynthesis to take place in the absence of your light or even hydrologic or water cycle. Mahirap, no? Kaya nga, importante talaga yung light. So it is also a limiting factor in a way because in the absence of your light, there will be no photosynthesis or there will be no initiation of hydrologic or water cycle. Your temperature, mas mainit, mas mabilis yung evaporation. Your humidity, it's the amount of your water vapor in the air. Now, for your humidity naman, class, I want you to remember na pag masyadong humid or kapaang, so most probably it will really rain. Now, for your wind naman, bakit wind, sir? Now, yung wind naman, it is associated with, this is a funny illustration. For example, may dalom diri sa Marbel, kung maghangin, palidon sa Sorala. So, meaning, it's a limiting factor in the ecosystem. Kasi, dinala na ng wind yung, yung clouds doon sa Sorala. So, hindi na mag-ulan diri sa Marbel. Now, your soil nutrients, of course, your plants will not grow if there is a lesser nutrient which is usable or beneficial to your plants. Pag pangit ang lupa, no, pagtataniman mo yung sandy na kind of soil, so mahirap yun dito tubo. Your pH naman, this refers to your as acidity or basicity. When say acid, just like for example your muriatic acid, kasi nga acid siya, meaning it could harm your skin or even in greater scale your plants, no? So that's why it's affected. Compared to plants that is planted ayan, near the beach or dito sa lupa natin, mas mataba talaga yung mga tanim dito sa lupa natin. Why? Because the pH is good. It's ideal in a way. Now, your salinity is also a major factor for your ecosystem na mga processes. Paano, sir? Salinity means the amount of salt in your water. Now, for example, your Dead Sea, masyadong maalat. Though there are fishes that can survive, but there is a limitation. Kasi nga, yung tolerance ng mga isda to particular salinity level is very low. No? So kaya in increased amount, it could also disrupt your ecosystem processes. Now for your moisture, pag masyadong basa, class, hindi din maganda. Why? Because it will also hinder some processes. For example, ang cactus, pag masyadong exposed into moisture, what will happen is it will die, malalanta. Now, for your angle of slope, this is true with locations that are slopey, meaning tang subida, no? Pag subida, mas dasig ang water flow. Kaya halin sa babaw, mahulog siya sa dalom. Doon nagasiso lang, ay doon nagasalide ka lang balahaw. Now, the angle of slope is also a limiting factor in your ecosystem. Your altitude, for example, is also a great limiting factor. Nasa number 10 siya. Why? Because areas that are higher has also a high tendency for faster water evaporation because they have a closer contact to the sun. Okay, that's it. That's how related all these limiting factors in the ecosystem to one another. Now, I want you to remember about Liebig's law of the minimum. It states that the local yield of terrestrial plants should be limited by the nutrient that is present in the environment in the least quantity relative to its demands for plant growth. And this statement has been confirmed worldwide. This is a practical illustration of your Liebig's law. Remember that this is a barn, okay? Now, I mean your barrel. A barrel is the one used as container for wine. Alam nyo ba na hindi nyo siya pwedeng punuin kasi nga yung least or your minimum component or your nutrients will be your shortest stav, for example, in this illustration, stav is ito yung mga kahoy, will just be the limit of your of the production level that you can have. The same is true with your in the ecosystem. Kung there is a lower supply of water, but there is an increased supply of carbon dioxide, regardless, apektado pa din yung processes in the ecosystem. So I want you to remember this barrel when you say about your Liebig's law, na yung pinakamababa na stav or na kahoy here, dito mo lang din siya kaya punuon. Hindi mo na siya pwede punuon dari compromising this part kasi mag-drain lang siya. So the same is true with your components in your ecosystem. Now for the next is your Shelfrod's law of tolerance. States that organism success is based on a complex set of conditions and that each organism has a certain minimum, maximum, and optimum environmental factor or combination of factors that determine success. So to explain to you that is this. For example, dito sa illustration, we have a so-called optimum range. When you say optimum range, ito yung ideal. Ideal na temperature, ideal na pH. pH again is the acidity or basicity of a certain component. Now for your optimum range, pag nilagay mo yung isang tanim dito sa optimum range, tutubo talaga siya ng mabuti. For example, if you're going to put your your potted plants into the soil, ang mangyayari, mas magbo-bloom, mas gaganda kasi ito yung optimum range or optimum environment ng inyong plants. Remember that. Now, for your optimum range or optimum environment, for example, pag yan, tinransfer mo sa zone of physiological stress. For example, yung tanim na nakapat, ilalagay mo pa talaga sa loob ng bahay. So what will happen is it will undergo a zone or it will enter the zone of your physiological stress. Meaning physio, it's functional stress, okay? Zone of your physiological stress. Now, in here, magfa-function siya but it is under stress. And alam nyo, yung zone of your physiological stress has an endpoint. Here in your tolerance range, nakita mo, may optimum range. Pero pag na-reach yung zone of physiological stress, ang mangyayari is, hindi siya tutubo ng mabuti. Though it will survive, but it will reach a certain point of intolerance. Ito naman yung intolerance. Again, uulitin ko, if you're going to put your planted sa lupa, it's on its optimum range, especially pag mataba. Pag yung potted plants, nilagay mo sa loob ng bahay, it will survive for days, but for after weeks, it will enter the zone of your physiological stress. Kaya bababa, de-decline. Okay? Yung temperature masyadong mainit sa loob ng bahay. And your physiological stress is also, yung physiological stress ninyo will enter the tolerance range. But remember that after the physiological stress, may zone of intolerance. And in this part, pwedeng mamatay na yung tanim or yung organism. So the same as, this is what it mean to say, yung meaning ng Shelfrod's law of your tolerance. Meaning may minimum, may maximum, and may optimum environmental factor or a combination of factors that determines the success of growth or production of a particular organism. Alam niyo yung ito class is also true with the growth of your bacteria. May optimum lang talaga siya na pH, may optimum siya na temperature, no? And as a medical technology student, I am also equipped about this, the optimum range of a particular bacteria. Kaya nga gumagamit tayo ng mga kojic acid because we are killing the optimum range or optimum pH na nabubuhay yung particular bacteria dyan sa ating muka, no? But too much of this will also incur zone of physiological stress, no? And later on, your skin will be intolerant to any forms of acidic na mga substances, okay? Yun yung ginamin niya, okay? So I hope that you got your Shelford's law and your Liebig's law in a glimpse. Alam ko nakuha nyo na ito. You can go back and again understand this particular topic. Now, you'll enter our chapter 6, your freshwater ecosystem. Now, for your freshwater ecosystem, it is a precious resource on Earth's surface. Now, it is also home to many diverse fish, plants, and crustacean species. Freshwater, aside from your ocean water, your freshwater, ito naman yung tubig na hindi galing sa ocean or hindi ocean. That's your fresh water. It could be in a form of lake, ayan, or a water source from ponds, ano pa ba, rivers, wetlands, streams, and even springs. Ganon. Now, that's your freshwater ecosystem. Your freshwater ecosystem is divided into your lotic ecosystem characterized by flowing. Pag lotic, meaning it's flowing. Examples are your rivers, streams, brook, and springs. Now, in your lotic ecosystem, kasi nga nagfo-flow siya, the oxygen level is higher due to, continually moving water of current, and the water is clear most of the time. Kasi nga, umaagas. Pag nag-aagas ang isa ka bagay, no, mag-settle down man ang mga particles. Okay? Although it will move, but most probably, the current will make the water more clearer. Okay? Pero pag stagnant ang isa ka tubig, stagnant ang isa ka bodies of water, no, just like your fish pond, no, most probably mag-settle down gid ang mga particles, maglubog gid na siya in the later part. Now for your lotic or your flowing water ecosystem, so here's the particular na example. Now, for example, your lake again supplies your water for your rivers, right? No, or even Ala Valley. Let's take for an instance, your Lake Cebu. Now, the lake, yung water sa lake was derived because of raining or precipitation. Kasi hindi naman tayo nagsusnow because we are a tropical country. Now, it will go down. Ayan, for example, sa Seven Falls, yung water in the Seven Falls will supply your water sa river. Now, yung water sa 50%. Yung water dito sa Seven Falls will flow. Ayan. So, ang nangyayari dito, class, it will magsusupply siya ng tubig in the other bodies of water. But I want you to see here in the different areas of your lotic ecosystem or your flowing water ecosystem. Dito, in this area, ito yung yung if you can see my cursor, dito sa mga curves, dito yung pinaka greater deposit ng nutrients. Ito lang naman yung gusto kong makita ninyo. Now, in here, let me just see kung ano yung term again, no? So in this grooves dito yung may pinakamaraming deposit ng nutrients kasi again, it's flowing. Now, since it's flowing, ang mangyayari is dito made-deposit dito sa mga curves dito yung greater amount of your nutrients. So, kung tatanungin niyo ako, sir, saan mostly namamahay yung mga isda? Is it in this area dito sa nagfo-flow or dito sa mga curves? Now, if you are a fisherman or kahit nga yung mga nagapanguryente bala, dili na siya actually nagapanago ang mga haluan, dili nagapanago ang mga isda nga damo because it is where the greater deposit of your nutrients are available. Okay, yan lang yung gusto ko matandaan ninyo. Now, where it is true that water may flow in thousands of channel, but it all returns to the sea. Kasi lahat ng waterways will be deposited or will be drained out to the sea. Kaya your sea is very diverse and it's composed of a lot of components kasi nga ito yung tapunan ng lahat ng water from here in the dry land or dito sa atin sa tawag nun sa kapatagan papunta doon sa tawag nun sa dagat. Yan, no? So water may flow in thousands of in 1,000 channels, but it all returns to the sea. Tandaan nyo lang yan. Now, for your freshwater ecosystem, division number 2, it's your lentic ecosystem. Una kanina is your lotic. Lotic is your flowing water ecosystem. Number 2 is your lentic ecosystem. Those whose water are still and are made up of ponds, ditches, lakes, and swamps. Ito yung mga steady naman ang tubig. Now, they are also, in particular, are part of your freshwater ecosystem. This ecosystem ranges in size from very small ponds or pools that may be temporary to larger lakes. Now, for larger lakes, your Atlantic ecosystem is also divided into, influenced by these 5 major factors. Number 1 is your thermal stratification. Number 2 is your vertical migration. Number 3 is your oxygen stratification, your light stratification, and your biological stratification. Now, for your thermal stratification, ang nangyayari is, in your thermal stratification, for example, if there is an increased heat, ang organisms tend to move lower. Meaning, nasa baba sila kasi mainit yung area nasa taas. So that's thermal stratification. And this is true in the setup of your ocean or your ponds, for example, in the lentic ecosystem because we are talking about your lentic ecosystem naman, no? So, pag ang isda naiinitan, pupunta yan sa baba para medyo malamig. So that's thermal stratification and it's also connected to your vertical migration. Aalis yung isda sa surface kasi masyadong mainit. Pupunta sila into the deeper portion of your lentic ecosystem. How about oxygen stratification? Now, yung mga fish kills, for example, kung aware ka mo sa stories about fish kills, these are due to your, these are due to your thermal stratification. Due to your oxygen stratification. Ayan. So to further explain that, and your light stratification naman, ito yung time na ang light naman, no? Ang pag masyadong maliwanag, for example, syempre, di ba, hadlok ang isda pag sanag. Kaya namin mingwit kung gabi. Kaya wala sila sang vision. And your biological stratification. Now, this is an example of your so-called na freshwater ecosystem. Now, in your thermal stratification, pag masyadong mainit, tendencies are yung mga fishes nagpupunta dito sa mga lower portions. But aside from that, no, your lentic ecosystem biologically, no, in your biological stratification, dun talaga yung optimum area na they can live. For example, yung mga catfish, mga luan or yung mga inyong mga haluan, ano pa ba? pantat, makita nyo na sila nagalubong sa lutak because they prefer to enter into the no light zone or yung mas colder na portion ng inyong Atlantic ecosystem. Kaya paghubas na gani ang tubig, nagalubong na sila nga nagalubong sa lutak, no? So kami may fish pond, kami I'm aware nga that's their process. Now, I think that is all muna for the first and the second part of our discussion. I will give you another video after this.